time today on France 24, sir. Can you tell us, first of all, briefly, what it is that the bishops today have agreed?
So what the bishop announced, and they have agreed on it since the last week. They have been meeting for 1 week to talk about all these issues. And what they agreed on was, first of all, there will be an independent commission that will look into all individual cases. Those who can be also go to justice, civil justice, but even those who cannot anymore because the time has passed by. And they will look into these individual cases to see if there is a financial indemnization possible because the abuse was done by a member of the clergy or another member of the Roman Catholic Church who was in function. And this is really new. So what the victims asked about the 4 R's, what they call the 4 R's. The first R was recognition of the problem. The second R was the responsibility of the church. And last Friday, the French bishops had very tough and very hard words on their own situation. So they acknowledged institutional responsibility for structural problems inside the Catholic Church that led to sexual abuse. The third R is reparation. That's what we're talking about today. And the bishops are willing to sell their own buildings that the church owns, which are not churches, because most of the churches don't belong to the church in France, but belong to the state. But these are other kinds of buildings that they are willing to sell in order to be able to pay these victims. And the fourth R is very important also. We don't talk a lot about this, but it's very important. It means reform. The French bishops acknowledge that we need church reforms to prevent these things to happen in the next years.
We've talked a lot then about compensation for victims. What does the Catholic Church believe is the right amount of money to compensate somebody who's been sexually abused by a priest?
This is a very complicated issue. Of course, any financial compensation is also symbolic. You can never compensate sufferings that have been so incredibly deep, wounded in a person's life. So when we look to other countries, for example, you look to Germany. In Germany, victims got until 5,000 euros when they were abused by somebody of the clergy. In the Netherlands, my home country, in the Netherlands, victims from members of the clergy, sexual abuse victims, got between 5,000 and even 100,000 euros. So this can go until up to millions of euros that the French Church has to count. But they didn't state yet the amount of money that the victims will get. So this is really one of the questions. There are 2 questions now that are in front of us. The first question is, what amount of money the Catholic Church will pay to these victims? And the second question, which is much more delicate and difficult, is how do victims come forth? What do they have to prove that they are a victim? The whole thing about sexual abuse is, of course, that there are no witnesses. This is one word against another, and many of these priests are already dead today. So, until how far can the Catholic Church go in acknowledging that here was abuse, even if we are not sure about it in a juridical way? So, all these victims in civil justice would not have anything, but the church is willing now to go further than the civil justice and to say, okay, we believe you, we believe this is credible, and so we will give you an amount of money. But the question of the proof is still very, very, very difficult to handle.
Well, that's really interesting then, because are you suggesting that individuals who've been victims of sexual abuse will have to provide some kind of proof in order to get this compensation and the official recognition from the church? Or will the Catholic Church say effectively, we understand that's now impossible and really those normal legal rights have been waived in this situation?
So the French Catholic Church can also learn from other churches, what happened in Germany and in the Netherlands, in Belgium, etc., Ireland too. For example, in the Netherlands, we saw that we had people that presented themselves as victims, and they turned out not to be. Because it is very easy to get this money from the church. You didn't need any proof for this. So this is a real problem. And this is a real problem that these new independent commissions has to deal with. So they have to find a balance between a Catholic Church that wants to go further than legally necessary. The Catholic Church now for the first time said, okay, we have a responsibility here. We want to go further than what is legally necessary. But at the other side, there is always the risk that non-victims present themselves as victims. So we need a credible story. We need something that seems credible. And of course, if one priest has more victims, the story gets more credibility. So this is one of the criteria that probably this commission will also use.
Just finally then, do you think that these plans will be enough to restore the confidence in the church, which clearly has been so shaken by all of this?
No, these plans will not, because these plans only handle with the past. What the Catholic Church has to do also in the same time is handle with the present and the future. And that's why the Catholic Church in France today announced this fourth hour of the victims, the reform. The French Church asked to propose that there will be clear reforms in handling abuse, but most of all, above all, handling power in the Catholic Church. Power today, the Catholic Church today is acting like a monarchy, where priests and bishops are very powerful. They don't have to tell to anybody why they take decisions. There is no control. Media do their jobs, but this is very difficult too often. So one of the most important things today is that Catholic bishops, Catholic priests, hand over part of their power or share part of their power with lay people, normal believers. And this is exactly the path that Pope Francis is taking since 1 month. Last month, he announced that this question of sharing power with normal people, with normal believers, lay people, is a process that will take 2 years. During 2 years, the worldwide Catholic Church will talk about this. And because Pope Francis knows very well that this handling of power was at the source, at the roots of all these sexual abuse problems.
Hendro Munsterman, it's been really interesting to talk to you today. Thanks for sharing your expertise and your analysis with us.